Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation's online lecture series. My name is Dr. Tamara Nair, and I am a research fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Today, I would like to talk a bit about climate change and security concerns, and I would like to specifically focus on the impacts that Southeast Asia will face. In August 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, or the IPCC, put out their report on the physical science basis of climate change. Now, the report stated that human activities are directly contributing to climate change. Human influence has warmed the planet at a rate that is unprecedented, at least in the last 2,000 years. And human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. There has also been evidence of this seen in observed changes in heat waves, heavy precipitation, droughts, and tropical storms. Now, with the release of this report, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has regarded it as a code red for humanity. Now, these weather and climate changes will have significant impacts in regions in Africa and Asia, including Southeast Asia. Now, these include changes to monsoon precipitation, which is projected to increase in the mid to long term at global scale, particularly over South and Southeast Asia. Now, these seasonal rainfall is very important for this region, South and Southeast Asia, especially when we think in terms of food production. The other point is that there is high confidence that for 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, heavy precipitation and associated flooding are projected to intensify and be more frequent in most regions in Africa and Asia, of course, including Southeast Asia. And there is also robust evidence and high agreement that human security will be progressively threatened as the global climate changes. Now, in addition to, of course, the devastating impacts on the biosphere, the hydrosphere, flora and fauna in the planet, one of the most worrying is actually the progressive threat to human security. For example, threats to food, water, health, and economic securities of communities across the planet, especially vulnerable communities. The question then arises is that how prepared are we, especially with given existing vulnerabilities in some societies or communities, when these impacts, some of which are already being felt, actually hit full on. Now, climate security is the idea that climate change impacts amplify existing risks in society that endanger the security of humans, of ecosystems, of economies, of infrastructure, and even the security of states. Now, climate-related security risks have far-reaching implications for the way the world manages peace and security. What we now know is that the world is, in fact, in a climate emergency. We are experiencing or will experience extreme weather variations, and the human influence on climate change is increasing. Of course, we do have international commitment, for example, the Paris Accord, on keeping global temperature rise to below 2 degrees Celsius. We must also be very aware of the interlinkages between climate, peace, and security globally, and of course, within states and between states. While climate itself is not going to create any form of conflict, its cascading effects make it a systemic risk, a security risk at many different levels, both local, national, and international level. And of course, as mentioned earlier, climate change impacts or risks will compound existing vulnerabilities that can be found in certain communities around the world. So then it becomes a case where we can no longer think of very strict borders in which we can contain the impacts or risks of climate change, simply because of the massive and transboundary implications. And these are some important points that countries will have to take into consideration when we think in terms of adaptation or mitigation strategies of these risks. So in this slide, I would like to talk a bit more about the implications of climate change, in particular for traditional and human security. With global warming and associated sea level rise, many countries are at risk of losing territories and experiencing mass migration. Now, this becomes a significant threat for Southeast Asia, especially because of the region's long coastline and heavily populated low-lying areas. Now, for archipelagic countries like the Philippines and Indonesia, they are immediate risk from sea level rise. As a matter of fact, of the 25 cities around the world that are most exposed, who will be most exposed to a 1 meter sea level rise, 19 of them are in Asia. And of course, there are implications for transboundary resource sharing and environmental pollution management. Just what would happen is mostly that some issues can be further complicated, especially when we think in terms of transboundary water management, for example, in the Mekong Basin, or other environmental issues such as the haze, wildfires, floods, etc., that of course cannot be contained within states, and we already have experience of that. But these, an exaggerated version of these, perhaps also a prolonged version of these, can test or impact relations between states. Yet another point is how military operations and their forced readiness can be impacted by climate change. We may see a stepping up of military's humanitarian role to prepare for more of such missions alongside its traditional roles. So this can have an impact on military infrastructure, military deployment, training, etc. And of course, climate change impacts, as already mentioned earlier, can have a very specific impact on peace and stability, especially when we think in terms of climate change and vulnerable regions, where climate change impacts acts as a risk multiplier. Some of the most vulnerable regions to climate change are also regions with serious pre-existing social and political challenges. Of the 20 most vulnerable countries to climate change, 12 were in conflict in 2020. And for example, Sudan or the Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, we don't see this in Southeast Asia, but it is never a good idea to estimate the wide-reaching and deep impacts of climate change that might create fractures.